Good morning. Today we are continuing on with Heidi, um, chapter 14, When Church Bells Ring. I got my headband on that I made with my knitting. Need to go to the hairdresser, so we're just doing the headband thing. All right, chapter 14. Here's how it looks. Looks like a scene of a city or a town. Remember, Heidi's back at the in the mountains where she wants to be. That's good. Heidi stood under the swaying branches of the fir trees, waiting for her grandfather, who was going to fetch the trunk from Dorfley, while Heidi stayed with the grandmother. The child could hardly wait to see the grandmother, yet the time did not seem long. She could not listen enough to the rustle of the fir trees, and stood drinking in the beauty of the green pastures with their golden blossoms. The grandfather came out of the hut, and they went down the path together. At Peter's hut they parted, and Heidi ran in. The grandfather had heard her step, or the grandmother had heard her step, and called out to her affectionately, "Have you come, child? Have you come again?" She grasped Heidi's hand and held it tightly, as though she feared the child might be taken away again. She talked about the rolls and how good they had tasted. Then Bridget added that the grandmother had eaten only one roll the day before because she was afraid they would soon be gone. Heidi listened attentively to Bridget and thought for some time. "I know what I'll do," said Heidi. "I'll write a letter to Clara, and she will send me many rolls. I had a great pile just like them in my closet, and when they were taken away from me, Clara said she would give me just as many more, and she will do so." "Dear me," said Bridget, "that is a good idea. But think, they would grow hard, too. If we only had a spare penny now and then, the baker down in Dorfley makes them. But I am hardly able to pay for the black bread." A joyful light spread over Heidi's face. "Oh, I have a tremendous lot of money, grandmother," she cried triumphantly. "Now I know what I can do with it. Every single day you must have a new roll, and 2 on Sunday, and Peter can bring them up from Dorfley. He can, grandmother." "No, no, child," said the grandmother in disapproval. "The money was not given you for that. You must give it to your grandfather, and he will tell you how to use it wisely." But Heidi would not listen. She danced and shouted around the room and exclaimed every now and then, "Now the grandmother can eat a roll every day and grow quite strong again. And, oh, grandmother," she stopped suddenly, for she had spied the old hymn book on the shelf, and a new thought came to her. "Grandmother, I can read quite well now. Shall I read a song out of your old book?" "Oh, yes," said the grandmother. "Can you really read, child?" Heidi climbed up in a chair and took down the book, covered thick with dust. She wiped it clean, sat down on her stool beside the grandmother, and asked what she should read. "Whatever you like, child," said the grandmother, and waited with eager expectancy. Heidi turned the leaves and read a line here and there. "Here is something about the sun. I will read you that. The sun o'erflowing, with splendor glowing, from golden fountains pours o'er our mountains, a spirit-quickening glory of light. Below I wandered, and mournful pondered, but now arising, with change surprising, I turned to the sky my enraptured sight. Mine eye beholdeth what God unfoldeth to tell the story of boundless glory. How vast the sum of his infinite might! His grace unbounded, in love is founded. The humblest creature may share his nature, the lowest depth and the highest height. Sweet peace and pleasure, in boundless measure, we know is given in the gardens of heaven, and thither my hopes yearn night and night. Today we languish in grief and anguish, but earthly sorrow shall fade tomorrow. After the storm, the sun shines bright. I like that. Now remember, this is written in stanzas, so they're groups of verses. It's not the same as a sentence because it's like a poem or a song. The grandmother sat still with folded hands and an expression of indescribable joy on her face, such as Heidi had never seen there before, although the tears were running down her cheeks. When Heidi stopped reading, she said entreatingly, "Oh, just once more, Heidi. Let me hear it just once more." The child began again. "Today we languish in grief and anguish, but earthly sorrow shall fade tomorrow. After the storm, the sun shines bright. Heidi, that gives me light. It gives me light in my heart. Oh, how good, oh, how much good you have done me." The grandmother repeated the joyful words again and again, and Heidi beamed with pleasure. Then someone knocked on the window, and she saw her grandfather outside, beckoning her to go home with him. She got up quickly, but not without assuring the grandmother that she would come again the next day. Bridget ran after Heidi with her dress and hat so she might take them with her. Heidi took the dress on her arm, for her grandfather knew her now, she thought, but the hat she obstinately refused. Bridget must keep it, for Heidi was determined never, never to put it on her head again. On the way home, Heidi had much to tell her grandfather. How happy the grandmother had looked when she heard the words of the old hymns, and how they could get white bread for her down in Dorfley if they only had the money. "Even if the grandmother is not willing, you'll give me my money, won't you, grandfather?" said Heidi. "Then I can give Peter a coin to buy a roll every day, and 2 on Sunday." "But the bed, Heidi?" said the grandfather. "A real bed would be a good thing for you. There would be enough left for many rolls." But Heidi gave him no peace. She assured him that she slept much better on her bed of hay than she had ever done in her pillow bed in Frankfurt. She begged so hard that he finally said, "The money is yours. Do whatever pleases you. You can get bread for the grandmother with it for many a long year." Heidi shouted with joy. "Hurrah! Now the grandmother will never have to eat hard black bread any more. Oh, grandfather, everything is lovelier than it ever was before in our lives." Heidi jumped up and down. Then suddenly she became very serious. Taking her grandfather's hand, she said, "If the dear Lord had done right away what I had prayed for so hard, everything would not be as it is now. I would only have come home again and brought the grandmother just a few rolls, and I couldn't have read to her. But the dear Lord had thought it all out so much better than I knew. I am glad that he did not grant what I asked and longed for. Now I will always pray as the grandmamma told me. And if the dear Lord does not do as I ask, I will remember it is because he is planning something much better, just the way he did when I was in Frankfurt. We will pray every day, won't we? We will never forget him." "And if one should do so," murmured the grandfather. "Oh, it would not be well for him, for then the dear Lord would forget him too." "That is true, Heidi. How did you know it?" "From the grandmamma. She told me all about it." The grandfather was silent for a while. Then he said, "And if it is so, then it is so. No one can go back, for whomever God has forgotten, he is forgotten." "Oh, no, grandfather, one can go back. That I know, too, from the grandmamma. And then it says so in the beautiful story in my book. When we get home, you shall see how beautiful the story is." As soon as they reached the hut, Heidi ran inside to get her book. With one bound, she was at her grandfather's side and had found her story, for she had read it so often that the book opened of itself at the place. Heidi read with great feeling about the prodigal son. "Isn't that a beautiful story, grandfather?" she asked. "Yes, Heidi, the story is beautiful," he said, but his face was so serious that Heidi became quite still and looked at her pictures. She quietly pushed the book in front of her grandfather. See how happy he is," she said, pointing to the picture of the prodigal son's return home, in which he stands in fresh garments beside his father, and once more is his son. A few hours later, when Heidi was asleep, her grandfather climbed the little ladder. He put his lamp beside her bed so that the light fell on the sleeping child. She lay there with folded hands, for she had not forgotten to pray. He stood looking at her for a long time. Then he too folded his hands and bowed his head. "Father," he prayed, "I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son." And great tears rolled down his cheeks. In the early daylight, the Alm-Uncle stood in front of his hut, looking around with beaming eyes. The sound of early bells came from up below, and the birds in the fir trees were beginning their morning songs. He stepped into the hut. "Come, Heidi," he called. "The sun is up. Put on a good dress, and we will go to the church together." Let me pause it really quick. Okay. Sorry, I got a little hot in here, probably from my coffee, and it's supposed to be 100 degrees today, so it's pretty warm. All right. Heidi was delighted at this request, and it did not take her long to get ready. In a short time, she climbed down the ladder, wearing her fine Frankfurt dress, but she stood in front of her grandfather and looked at him in surprise. And here's a picture. "Oh, grandfather, I've never seen you look so before," she exclaimed. "You've never worn the coat with the silver buttons. You are so splendid in your beautiful Sunday coat." The old man looked at the child with a contented smile. "And you in yours. Now come," he said. He took Heidi's hand in his, and they went together down the mountain. The clear-toned bells were sounding in every direction. "Do you hear them, grandfather?" asked Heidi. "It is like a great festival." Down in Dorfley, the people were already in church and just beginning to sing when the grandfather and Heidi entered and sat down in the last row. But in the midst of the singing, the person next them nudged his neighbor with his elbow. "Have you noticed? The Alm-Uncle is in church." This person nudged the next one, and so on, and in a short time it was being whispered in every corner. "The Alm-Uncle! The Alm-Uncle!" And nearly everyone turned to look. But when the pastor began to preach, they became attentive. There was such warm praise and thanksgiving in the pastor's words that his listeners felt that something wonderful had happened. When the service was over, the Alm-Uncle went out, holding the child by the hand, and walked to the parsonage. The other people stood in little groups outside the church, talking excitedly. "It may be that the Alm-Uncle is not so bad as they say," said one man. "Did you notice how carefully he held the little one by the hand?" "That is what I have always thought," said another. "Bridget has told us how kind the Alm-Uncle has been to the grandmother." Then the baker said, "Wasn't I the first to tell you? Do you suppose a child would leave a fine home to go back to a grandfather if he was wicked and she was afraid of him?" As the people talked, they began to feel more kindly toward the Alm-Uncle. Suddenly it seemed as if they were waiting to welcome an old friend who had long been absent from them. Meanwhile, the Alm-Uncle had gone to the study door and knocked. The pastor opened it and met the visitor, not with surprise as he might have done, but as if he were expecting him. He grasped the old man's hand and shook it heartily. The Alm-Uncle stood in silence, for he was not prepared for such a warm greeting. Then he collected himself and said, "I have come to ask the pastor to forget the words I said to him on the alm, and that he will not bear me ill will for being obstinate toward his well-meant advice. The pastor was right, and I was wrong. I will follow his advice, and next winter take up quarters in Dorfley, for the severe weather up yonder is not good for the child. She is too delicate. Even if the people down here look at me askance, I deserve nothing better, and certainly the pastor will not do so." The pastor's friendly eyes beamed with delight. "Neighbor," he said, "I promise that you shall never regret your willingness to come down and live among us again. You will always be welcome in my house as a dear friend and neighbor, and we shall find good friends also for the little girl." The pastor laid his hand on Heidi's curly head, then took her by the hand and led her to the door. The people standing around outside saw him shake hands with the Alm-Uncle as if they were close friends. Scarcely had the door closed behind the pastor when the whole assembly pressed toward the Alm-Uncle, and so many hands were held out to him that he did not know which he ought to grasp first. "I am glad, uncle," said one. "I am glad, uncle, that you are coming back to us again." And another said, "I have long wanted to speak with you." Similar remarks were heard on every side, and when the uncle told them that he intended to take up his quarters in Dorfley again and spend the winter with his old acquaintances, there was great rejoicing. A number of the villagers walked with the grandfather and child part of the way up the Alm, and when they left, they made him promise to call on them when he and Heidi came down to the village again. Heidi looked at him in surprise. Grandfather, you have never looked so handsome before today. Do you think so? He smiled. Well, you see, Heidi, I feel happy because I am on good terms with people and at peace with God and man. That does one good. The dear Lord was good to me when he sent you up on the alm. When they reached Peter's hut, the grandfather opened the door and went in. Good day, grandmother, he called. I think we must do a little mending before the autumn wind comes. Dear me, that is the uncle, exclaimed the grandmother. That I should live to see this. I can't thank you for all you have done for us, uncle. May God reward you for it. The grandmother held out her hand, and the uncle shook it heartily. I have one thing more to ask of you, she said, her voice trembling. Do not let Heidi go away again before I lie at rest in the churchyard. You do not know what the child is to me. Never fear, grandmother, said the uncle soothingly. We shall all stay together, God willing, for a long time. Then Bridget drew the uncle mysteriously into a corner and showed him the lovely hat trimmed with feathers. She told him that she did not like to take such a fine gift from a child. But the grandfather looked well pleased at Heidi and said, The hat is hers, and if she doesn't care to wear it any more, it is all right. If she gave it to you, why, take it. Bridget was delighted at this unexpected decision. It is really worth more than 10 francs, she said, and in her delight she held the hat high in the air. What a blessing this Heidi has brought back home with her from Frankfurt. Just then Peter came in. Panting and out of breath, he stood in the middle of the floor and held out a letter for Heidi. The postmaster in Dorfli had given it to him. Then everyone sat down around the table and listened eagerly while Heidi read the letter aloud. It was from Clara Sesemann, who wrote how lonely she had been. She begged so hard to visit Heidi that her father had consented to take her and the grandmamma on a journey to Ragaz the coming autumn. The grandmamma sent word that she thought Heidi had done right in wishing to buy the grandmother some rolls, and she was sending the old lady some coffee to drink with them. Coffee. Everyone was so excited at the prospect of Clara's visit, and there was so much to talk about it, that even the grandfather did not notice how late it was getting. But the best thing that happened, said the grandmother, was for an old friend to come and give us his hand again, just as he used to do long ago. You will come again soon, uncle, and send the child tomorrow. The grandfather promised, and then it was time to go. As he and Heidi walked home, they could hear the peaceful sound of the evening bells ringing down in the valley, and the whole alm seemed to shine with happiness in the Sunday evening light. Now it seems like the problem is solved. She's back at home. He's kind of come to terms with God and with his fellow man, meaning all the people in Dorfli, and everyone's happy, right? So there couldn't be any more problems. Well, we still have about this much left. This one. So, interesting, right? Very interesting. The next one's called Part 2, and then Chapter 1, Preparations for a Journey. I'm going to stop it there. You guys enjoy your day. Be good, be happy, be kind to each other, love each other, and I will see you on the next one.